Okay, now is he in his...
And get up here.
Do you need to be plugged in?
Nope. This was working. Do you want to work on it, and I'll get started without the.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, so I'm Corey Ford. I am the co-founder and managing director of Matter Ventures, which is a startup accelerator and small venture capital firm that I started in 2012. You heard a little bit of my story, but I thought maybe I'd give a little bit more narrative to that. Then talk a little bit about what we do at Matter, and then really open it up to questions, questions about the how and the why behind what we do. So I'd like to keep it pretty informal. But in terms of me, so I began my career as a journalist. Never ever expected to be a venture capitalist at all. I got really lucky. My first job was with the co-founder of Frontline, which is on public television. Does anybody raise your hand if you know what Frontline is? Have you heard of it? So it's basically like the last bastion of long-form documentary.
Sorry, I'm going to leave this here to get, just in case.
Okay, great. Basically the last bastion of long-form documentary journalism in the United States. We win all the awards every year. It is part of public media, and I was really, really proud of the 17 films we got to work on there. I was there on September 11th, 2001, so worked on the team that made Frontline's first response to that. We were some of the first journalists to report that there was a movement in Washington to go to war with Iraq back in 2002. Actually, 2001 is when we first started reporting that. So I had what I thought was like the best job in the world and that I would never, ever leave it. But then I just had a sense that the world was about to change pretty dramatically, especially in terms of media and journalism. And so back in 2005, 2006, I decided that I was going to leave one of the best jobs in broadcast journalism because I felt like the world was about to change really dramatically and we weren't ready to change with it. And so I decided to apply to MBA program out here. Was super surprised when I got in, and I headed out west. And I came here, just like probably many of you are here for the first time today, just a sponge, eating up everything that I could around entrepreneurship, innovation, business, etc. Went to the MBA, loved my experience at Stanford Business School, loved everything around entrepreneurship, but felt like my entrepreneurship education was falling a little short there because it wasn't answering one question at the time. I hope they are today, which is they had great cases on, okay, you're running a company, how do you scale it, how do you do this or that, but not once did we start from, I want to be an entrepreneur, how do I actually take the first step? And raise your hand if you're like interested in that question. Yeah, right? Like you're here at Stanford, a lot of people are interested in that. So I got really lucky again. At that time, there was this little academic startup that was only a couple years old here at Stanford called the D School. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the D School here. Definitely a place you should check out. I think everybody knows about it now. Not very many people did back then. And I discovered this process called design thinking, user-centered prototype-driven design. I had never come across that before. And I fell in love with that process, and I thought two things. One, I think you could use design thinking process in order to answer that question of how do you start a company from scratch. You can actually use that creative process to do that. I forgot what the second one was that I was going to say. That you could start that from scratch. Oh, and two, that you could apply that to the future of media. When I graduated MBA, I actually got this great opportunity to be a fellow and lecturer at the D School and built out their curriculum around applying design thinking to early stage entrepreneurship. And then selfishly, wherever I could, to also apply that to the future of media. So we have Knight Fellows in the room, raise your hand. So I was the person who walked over from the D School to the Knight Fellows and said, you guys really should be talking and working with each other more. And so instead of just having a year here to just, open your mind, to actually try to build some innovations. And this is a process to use that. So we got that started. The work that I did around entrepreneurship and design thinking got noticed by somebody who was building a venture capital firm for Eric Schmidt of Google. And they recruited me to come on board and build an incubator for them and be the first employee of their venture capital firm. So that was my first exposure to venture capital. Did that for 2 years, loved it, but it had brought me away from the future of media and journalism. And so in early 2012, I ended up getting the opportunity to leave there and start my own venture capital firm and accelerator called Matter, and built that up from scratch. What Matter is not somebody looking around and saying, hey, let's build a Y Combinator for media. It's actually much more rooted in seeing what some of the problems were in the industry and trying to take some of the mindsets and methodologies here in Silicon Valley and apply it to that. So let me talk a little bit about what we do at Matter, and then I really just want to open it up to a lot of questions. So at Matter, yeah. There we go. It helps suppress the right arrow. At Matter, I think of us as having two customers. First and foremost are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who we believe have the potential to build the future of media. But at the same time, there's also really important media institutions in the world. Institutions like the New York Times, the Associated Press, McClatchy, kind of what you think of when you think of like old school media properties, who we also want to help thrive as well. So at Matter, we decided to build an independent place where both entrepreneurs and mission-aligned media partners can come together in order to experiment in building the future of media. And the way that we think about our mission is that we want to support both entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who we believe have the potential to create a more informed, a more empathetic, and a more inclusive society. I actually don't love using the term media because it means so many different things to so many people. Some people think of it as very narrowly only content, right? So taking a book out of being a good design thinker, you want to kind of focus on the verbs of what you want to accomplish rather than the nouns. So how do we build a more informed, a more empathetic, and a more inclusive society? And I changed these as I went, so we can come back to why I changed them. From when we launched, it was informed, connected, and empowered. So specifically, what do we do? We invest in entrepreneurs. We have about a 2% acceptance rate. We invest in 12 at a time, 6 who are based in San Francisco, 6 who are based in New York. And we run them through, does have a pointer? A 20-week program that is based on building scalable media ventures using design thinking process. And at the same time, what we do with our partners, like the New York Times and the Associated Press and KQED here locally, is they take leaders from their organization, as well as people working on internal projects, and we run them through an accelerator as well. And I'm happy to come back to this and talk to you about the how behind this, but it's basically 2 parallel 20-week programs. And what we try to teach them to do is how to build scalable media ventures using a human-centered, prototype-driven process called design thinking. So at its core, the way that you can think of Matter is that it's taking design thinking process, applying it to entrepreneurship, and applying it to the future of media that matters. But why does this matter in the first place? Why should we even be doing this? Any guesses? Why is it important to build a place for experimentation within the future of media?
Because it's always covering something new.
It's always covering something new?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the impact is huge because it's shaped every ordinary people's the information they receive and what they think about the society in the future. And also you see the huge change from traditional media, the journalism is dying, or the new media with technology is growing. But what's the real innovation? What's the next?
Mm-hmm.
That's like really huge impact for the future.
Great. Yeah.
You basically don't want the wrong people to invent the future, right? So you said your mission aligned and empathetic and inclusive.
Okay.
So if you bring the wrong people, and when I say wrong, I don't mean it good or evil kind of way. But,
Yeah.
sometimes when you build something, you don't know the consequences of that. So maybe if you apply the design thinking lens, you might better be able to think about unintended consequences.
Cool. Yeah.
Just on the website, you talked a lot about failing forward.
Yeah.
And sort of having space to experiment and fail, which I think is cool because if that happens, publicly outside of sort of a space designed for experimentation, it's trusted in media. So having a space just for
A safe space to fail. Sorry. No. Yeah. Cool. So, I think it's really important for a number of reasons. So first of all, we're at a pretty, and I founded this in 2012, right? And things have not necessarily gotten better in media and journalism. We're at a pretty interesting point in our history. So we believe that media institutions are the bedrock of democracy. If you do not have strong media institutions and ecosystems, you're not going to have a strong democracy, right? That's why this work is so important, if you care about democracy, right? I'm assuming everybody does, but our media institutions are under threat. They're clearly under threat politically. They are under threat culturally. The trust in media institutions is pretty low. And for a very long time now, they've been under threat economically. And this is important because as media institutions erode, so do core democratic values. And I think we've seen that play out over the last few years. So we believe we need strong media institutions now more than ever to build a more informed society, to close this massive empathy gap that we have in our society, and also to support both more inclusive media and more diverse leaders, both within media institutions as well as in venture capital and entrepreneurship. So things weren't as crazy when I founded Matter, but you could tell the writing was on the wall and that a lot of innovation needed to happen in this space. And I was really inspired by what Clay Shirky wrote back when the bottom was falling out of the newspaper industry. I think he wrote this in maybe 2008, 2009. He said this. He said, if the old model is broken, what will work in its place? And the answer is nothing will work, but everything might. Now is the time for lots and lots of experiments. And I knew, coming from my media and journalism background, that place just did not exist at all within media, and also that the culture was just not right for it. There was no failing forward. The whole idea of failure within media was something that you would run from, right? So not a lot of experimentation at the time. So we decided to build that place for both entrepreneurs and for mission-aligned media partners. And the biggest thing that I focus on, and I think that we need to focus on, is how do you build and reinforce a culture of experimentation every single day? Because if there's one thing that I learned in my own personal Stanford and Silicon Valley journey, is that this is what makes this place special, is a culture of being able to experiment and fail forward and try things. And that's actually how real companies are built. Once you look into the histories of almost any companies, it's what I call the drunken walk of the entrepreneur. It's not coming up with a perfect plan. And most of society tries to teach us that we need a perfect plan, and that's wrong. So within the walls of Matter, we try to reinforce the opposite of that. And it's also done with a community, getting lots and lots of feedback from multiple different perspectives that can help our entrepreneurs and our partners at our partner organization. And finally, but always coming back to having strong values. So we are a for-profit venture capital firm, but we are also very mission driven. And so the way we think about us, I kind of wrote this on a whiteboard when Matter was just an idea on a whiteboard. We think of it as the intersection of the values of public media and journalism with the methods and mindsets of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship. Started in 2012 with one of the more unusual funders of a venture capital firm, which is KQED, the public radio and television station here in San Francisco, as well as the Knight Foundation. We expanded to New York City in 2016, and so the hypothesis there was we wanted to link the entrepreneurship capital of the world with the kind of the news media capital of the world, and create what I like to call intentional serendipity between those two coasts. We started with these 3 partners in our first fund, and then our second fund, we brought on more partners such as the New York Times, the Associated Press, etc. And Google is a sponsor of what we do. In our first fund, we did 3 classes, 19 investments across 3 cohorts. In our second fund, we have done 55 investments across these cohorts, and you can see here we expanded to New York City, so we do 2 cohorts at a time. And we also experimented with doing some seed investing as well. When you start something, you literally, I mean, you're starting it from scratch, right? We had like an empty room. I built all of these things literally by hand. But I think when you lead with a strong mission, a community can build around it. So to date, we have 340 mentors who've all volunteered to help our entrepreneurs along the way. So this is the portfolio that we've invested in our second fund. So far to date, we've had acquisitions by BuzzFeed, by Change.org, by Kickstarter. Actually, the team that was acquired by Kickstarter was a team that I met in one of Ant's classes, who then applied to Matter, and then went through our program, iterated on their startup, and got acquired by Kickstarter. Medium, Quora, and Snapchat. Our startups have raised about $50 million to date from Fund 2. 53% of our founders' CEOs are women. 40% are people of color. 1.7x return on invested capital to date. And basically, a lot of the story is still to be written because we invest super early. 75% of our investments are still alive or have been acquired. And we've done this not just on our own, but we've done this in conjunction with some of the best names in kind of classic journalism. And we've tried to help them along the way. Because ultimately, you know, I think ultimately my hypothesis is this. If you're a media company, whether old or new or whatever, you know, the world is changing so dramatically, and it's just accelerating, right? Consumer user behaviors and habits changing constantly, right? Technology is changing constantly, and business models, right? We're still trying to actually figure out what are the business models that can sustain media and journalism. So some of these companies who are trying to reinvent themselves, what I tell them is your job, some of them would be happy if they just came up with the next big thing. And I don't believe that that's what the goal should be, because since you know the desirability, feasibility, and viability of what you're building in this space is changing constantly, what you really need to build is a culture and processes that can successfully continually to reinvent itself going forward. And so that's why we focus a lot on experimentation and process, and quite frankly, less on saying, the future of media is going to be X and we're putting all our money on that. We actually believe what our job is to create a space to attract the best entrepreneurs in the world who want to try to build something in this space and be surprised by what they do. Because if you're going to back up something that success looks like a drunken walk, you can't have a perfect plan either. Let's see. Oops. So that is what we do at Matter, trying to change media for good. And I'm happy now to talk about, to go into more in depth in any of this. Maybe what I'll start doing is talk a little bit about how we actually run this accelerator. What's the how behind it? So let me just go back to this really confusing slide that I have. Here. So just ignore this bottom part. So how our program works, so first, there's a whole other 20 weeks ahead of this, which is actually selecting our entrepreneurs. And we take them through various stages in our funnel. So first of all, applications are open to anybody in the world to apply. We've got, our typical class is half from the local area, so half from either Silicon Valley or New York, and then half from the rest of the world. They have an application, we cut that down, then we have an in-person pitch, 10-minute pitch, 10-minute Q&A. And then we get to a part where we really try to figure out who we want to spend more time with. And it's like the key part of our application process, which is what we call a mini project. And the mini project is simply this. So instead of pitching us on your venture, we want to know whether you're going to be able to successfully navigate this drunken walk of the entrepreneur, or the fog of entrepreneurship. So we tell anybody working on a venture or thinking about a venture right now, raise your hand high. This class has to learn how to raise their hands. Raise your hand high. Okay, cool. So totally feel free to steal this from me. This has worked really well for people applying to us. So, and it's pretty simple. Take your venture, break it down into 3 buckets: feasibility, desirability, and viability, or technology, customer needs, business. State your top 3 hypotheses in each of those categories, where, if they're not true, your business would not work. And now in the next 7 hours, circle 1 in each category and get out into the world and talk to the best expert or best customer to help you validate that hypothesis or not. Come back to us, tell us what you learned, why you talked to that person, and really importantly, what you're going to do tomorrow with that imperfect information. So ultimately, that's what an entrepreneur has to do every single day. And so we have some entrepreneurs who their pitch is great, and then we give them that, and they're just totally frozen. And then we have some entrepreneurs who's maybe a little rough around the edges, but then they come back, and they're just okay, we track down this person, and this person. And I really hate to admit this to you, but you know how we said in the pitch that it's going to go this way or not? I'm kind of doubting this one hypothesis that we have right now. So I think what we need to do is do X instead of Y. Those are the type of entrepreneurs that we want to invest in. Not the entrepreneurs who come back and say, it was great. We went out, we talked to 3 customers or experts. They said everything's validated and great, so we're solid. No more risks in our business, right? That's not how you build a venture. So anyway, we do that. We do then have what we call a finalist interview week, and then we select our teams. So from there, we do an immersive experience, which is basically a design thinking boot camp for our entrepreneurs. And then it's a series of what we call design reviews. And I think design reviews are kind of one of the keys to creating a culture of innovation. What it simply is creating a safe space for our entrepreneurs to fail fast. So what we'll do is we'll have a room full of mentors. maybe 50 to 100 people. We'll have a table of 5 to 6 experts, so VCs, people in media, entrepreneurs, technologists, etc. And the entrepreneurs will have to pitch their venture using the current hypotheses that they have. And what I tell them is, whether if you're deciding you're not sure where to go left or right, pick one, pitch it really hard, and you're going to get a lot better feedback than if you just stood in front of everybody and said, I don't know what I should do. So they pitch it to this room, and then we create a space for them to just get feedback. They're not allowed to answer questions. All they have to do is write down and say thank you. And we have about 20 questions we go through that I think every entrepreneur needs to answer, and we see whether they've accomplished that in their pitch. We do that, we have 4 design reviews, sometimes on separate coasts, sometimes together. We want our entrepreneurs to get in front of the communities in each location. And then we have a demo day where the goal there is not to fail fast. The goal is to get in front of investors, potential customers, so that they can raise funding or close deals, whatever the entrepreneurs want to accomplish there, to continue on in their journey. But most importantly, every day, what I need to think about is, how am I creating a culture where it's okay to experiment? On the partner side of the equation, what we do is, so like the New York Times or the Associated Press, they go through the same thing, but they're not like residential. So these entrepreneurs are all working in the same space together. Our partner teams are coming in at these different time periods. So what will happen is, so let's say at like Design Review 2, they'll come on a Thursday night, they'll be in the audience and hear all of our entrepreneurs pitch, and they'll learn a lot from that, because our entrepreneurs might completely change their business between here and here, right? And most of our partner teams do not make decisions that fast, and so it's very inspirational for them. And then what happens is we flip it, and on Friday mornings, our partner teams pitch something that they're working on, and they get feedback from folks in the room, including our entrepreneurs. So it's a very specific way to get media industry folks working and learning from entrepreneurs. And the hope is that, honestly, I don't really care too much about the project that comes through here. I hope it's successful. But really what we're trying to do is help them learn how to adopt a more entrepreneurial and design thinking based culture, process, and mindsets. And we see that then flourish throughout their own organization. How many on a team? I could talk about, I've been working on this for 7 years, so I can talk about a number of different things, but maybe we should open it up to questions.
So let me just ask you a follow-up question, and then Karen, you can chime in here.
Yeah.
What are some of the inside these large media organizations? What's the biggest sticking point that you have observed to get them over the hump so that it can become more innovative and they can become more entrepreneurial and more willing to fail often? And how do you get your entrepreneurs to be comfortable with, on their end, floating in the land of ambiguity?
Yeah. 2 really great questions and 2 very hard things to do. So I'll take the first one first. Is how do you help change these media organizations, right? Fundamentally, the biggest sticking point, it's culture, right? Culture. Forget what GSB professor said this, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. He's always said it. Culture is more important than almost anything. And quite frankly, old school media organizations have not had an innovative culture for both good reasons and bad reasons. One of the good reasons is journalists have typically been separated off from the rest of the business, etc. which is good because you don't want that to influence their journalism, but it's bad right now because what we need is everybody involved in figuring out how to build a feasible, viable, and desirable business venture, and we need them at the table doing that as well. But really culture. And so how do you change a culture? First of all, it's really hard. I'm not up here talking about, oh, it's just an overnight thing. It's really hard and it takes a lot of dedication. What we've learned, and I learned most of this when I was teaching at the D School, adults learn through experiential learning. Adults learn through experiential learning. So the way that we start is we get those people in a room. So the way our boot camp works, all of our organizations will send different leaders and different teams to us. We'll mix them up across organizations. And we want to have not just the same level of people, right? But we want to have diverse teams. And we also want to have, the CEO in the room and like the new social media intern in the room. And what we do, and I think this is actually one of the most fundamental things that we did from the beginning that has been helpful, is we're independent. So we have this independent place where they can come together. I don't really care if you're the CEO or if you're the intern. We basically create this kind of flat structure and experience. And then we take them through an exercise of where basically the point is to learn the design thinking process and mindsets. But the key is don't start on a project that is too close to home, right? So don't take, I don't know, a journalist and say, okay, this project is going to be about redesigning the homepage or whatever is close to home to them, because then they're not going to actually be in the mindset to learn. So it depends on who the crowd is, but we might say, your job is to build a venture that is going to bring delight in the day of a young woman in San Francisco or something, right? We don't know what that is, but you're going to go out, you're going to do need finding, prototyping, et cetera, and we're going to end up building a venture. And make it more about kind of the people. Anyway, long story short, you change culture through experiences because it's all about people. You start with a safe place to fail, right? On the type of project you give them. Many of them are curmudgeon-y and resistant for the first kind of day and a half, and then they have these light bulb moments. And then once they have those, then they actually can't help themselves to actually start bringing that back into their organization. And you see little changes at first. Like, first things you see are like meetings change in a big way. Questions people ask in meetings. A lot of people are asking about who the user is, where they've never actually asked that before. Those sorts of things happen. And then the second was on ambiguity. How do you create a comfort zone for the ambiguity for entrepreneurs? So again, that's a hard thing to do. I think it comes back to like, what do you reinforce in your culture, right? And so what we reinforce in our culture is feedback and learning and making quick decisions, right? So in a way, we celebrate smart failure. We celebrate failure, right? So that's ambiguous, but so when we teach the design thinking process, success looks like a drunken walk. It doesn't look like a perfect plan. But when you look at that drunken walk, that's really ambiguous and that can be very scary. So what do teams hold on to if they don't have a perfect plan? What they hold on to is process, is actually design process. So there is a plan, it's just a process, and you actually don't know exactly what the destination looks like. And so we teach them to kind of embrace the process and the mindsets along the way, and that's the grounding that they can have, also being reinforced by, I think, positive reinforcement for taking risks and making experiments and learning from them.
Anna? Yeah, I think Ben started this.
Yeah. Valley and places that foster startup disruptive mindsets have been accused of considering the ethical or greater societal implications of their products as kind of an afterthought. So how does Matter help companies prioritize these kinds of broader effects, especially when they're just trying to think of something in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So that comes in a couple of different ways. There's the people you bet on, right? And there's the questions that you ask as they build it. So at Matter, and anytime you're actually investing in early stage entrepreneurs, what you need to know is that the only constant is change, right? So hopefully the only constant is the team that you're betting on. Because even if the team, when they're pitching us, thinks that they're like 90% of the way there, they're like not. And what's going to come out the other side is going to look really different if we're doing our job. So we make bets on people mostly. I'd say 90% people, 10% kind of what they're pitching and want to do. And we drill into their motivations for why they want to build this. And that's that's a big part of our decision-making process. Now, once we invest in them, we don't control our entrepreneurs. If you try to control entrepreneurs, you would be a very terrible investor or coach. But what we do is, we ask questions along the way. So at those design reviews, the second question that we ask everybody in the room is, do you believe that this venture has the potential to create a more informed, more empathetic, and/or a more inclusive society? And give feedback on that, right? So I think I think one of the keys is you have to select for the motivations of the people, and you have to build into your process those types of ethical questions that come up along the way. And the reason why, and you also want to get diverse perspectives when